All public speaking experts and coaches will tell you that telling stories is a great way of getting a serious point across during a business presentation. After all, we've been hardwired to listen to stories for hundreds of thousands of years. They'll also tell you pretty unanimously that the best source for these stories is your own experience. Using your own stories, they say, will help you to create rapport and empathy with the audience. It will help you to emote more easily. And so they tell you to open up your heart, bare your soul, share your pain, let them see your emotional trauma. But I disagree, and I'm in a minority of one here, so I'd better explain. The problem with that advice is that it's aimed primarily at people who want to become professional speakers. Now, if you want to become a professional speaker and have a keynote address that you take around various venues and deliver again and again to big audiences, then fine. Open up your soul, share your pain, tell them how you got over that debilitating illness, that traumatic car crash, that abusive childhood, that terrible divorce. But most people watching this won't want to become public speakers. They'll want to just improve their business presentations, and a business presentation is a different thing altogether. You try bearing your soul or sharing your pain while delivering a presentation on the sales figures on a cold February afternoon in a motel meeting room on the interstate near Boise, Idaho, and not only will you feel pretty uncomfortable, but you'll make your audience feel uncomfortable as well. So if that's the case, where should you get your stories from? Well, you can get them from anywhere, providing it's a good story and it illustrates the point you want to get across. So tell stories of kings and queens and politicians and generals and philosophers and scientists and artists and doctors and sports stars and showbiz personalities. There are thousands of stories out there you can use that will perfectly illustrate the point you want to make. And let's face it, if you're giving a lot of presentations, which many of us do, you don't have an inexhaustible bank of personal experiences to draw on anyway. Now, once you've decided on the story you want to tell, you have to decide how to tell it, how to make it interesting. Now, you might think, duh, that's pretty obvious, Nick, but if it's not interesting per se, why not bin it and get a story that is? What I mean is you have to tell it in a way that's interesting to everybody in the audience. You see, you might have a great story about something that happened in the life of Leonardo da Vinci. But how do you tell it so that people who aren't interested in art or Renaissance Italy want to listen? You might have a great story about a Superbowl final. But how do you tell it that makes it interesting to people who aren't into the NFL? And I think there's two pretty simple main ways of doing this. The first is to inject surprise in the story. And what you do here is you tell the story in a way that it's going in one direction, so that outcome A seems inevitable, and then something happens to suddenly switch direction completely so that outcome B happens instead. Just think about how powerful this is when it's done in movies like The Sixth Sense, where at the end you sit there and go, wow, I didn't see that coming. There was no way I was expecting that. Now, you can't always do this for every story, but if you can, it's a great technique. If you can't, you can always use human interest, and this means telling the story not as a straightforward narration of events. So this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But it's about telling the story from the viewpoint of one of the protagonists, looking at it through his or her eyes. The novelist Stephen King said that all the great stories are about people, not events. So decide who your protagonist is going to be. If your story is about a Super Bowl final, well, the obvious candidates are one of the two coaches, one of the two quarterbacks, or one of the other players who stands out from the crowd in some way. If your story is about military history, the obvious candidates are the generals who commanded the armies on either side. Now, you can tell the story from the point of view of a private soldier in either army, but it's better to tell it from the viewpoint of someone who had the ability to influence events rather than just be a passive bystander and let things happen to him. Once you know who your protagonist is going to be, research him or her, find out as much as you can about them. Are there things that happened in their past that might have had a bearing on their behavior in the story that you're telling? For example, in a separate video, I used the story of the surrender of the Austrian army just prior to the Battle of Austerlitz to Napoleon. to illustrate how to add surprise and human interest. Now, if you're not, unless you're into the Napoleonic period or military history, you might think, I give that one a miss, Nick, not really my thing. But there's a fantastic piece of surprise in there which you'll never see coming, a great twist in the tale. But I also tell it from the viewpoint of General Mack, the Austrian commander. Now, in researching about General Mack, I discovered that 10 years previously he'd been responsible for losing northern Italy to Napoleon and had been imprisoned in Paris for 2 years as a prisoner of war, despite having been promised his freedom. And so I used this fact to give Mack a personal drive for revenge in the story I was telling. Now, the posh phrase for the surrender of the army was the capitulation at Ulm. And if you look in Wikipedia on that, you won't find that fact anywhere. It was only when I actually researched General Mack as an individual that I came up with that little nugget. So, 2 things: inject surprise wherever you can, and tell it from the viewpoint of an individual. That way it will make it far more interesting to far more people. If you've enjoyed this video, why not check out my 3.5-hour online course, How to Open with Impact, which you can get for free for a limited period by following the link that's on the screen now. It's 32 bite-sized videos, so you can watch it whenever and wherever you like. You can binge watch the whole thing or consume it 5 minutes at a time, depending on your schedule. And as I said, for a limited period of time, it's free.